This time of year. We get about 3 or 4 weeks under our belts, and then it's time for Talk Tuesday to kind of frame the year because if you probably felt it already, things are moving pretty quickly. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we're already planning for next year and all the things that happen for that, believe it or not. So we're happy to have a little momentum under our belts and activities and sports and musicals in full production right now. So it's an exciting time. So I hope today we'll give you a little bit more information about how we are, as a leadership team, framing this year. And although the title behind me here says, our priorities for the school year, what I'm really going to talk about today is more around the future of education, how things are trending, kind of what is driving our efforts as leaders. So a little more context of the strategic plan. If you're not sure what I'm talking about with the strategic plan, you'll get a little glimpse of that today. So I'm going to launch into it. There'll be a little bit of time for discussion among yourselves and some questions at the end. So I'll try not to talk all that much. I've also got to figure out, I've got to stand here so the sound works and I can't block it. So if you see me wandering around, just bear with me. And I'll introduce myself in a second. But I always want to start with the mission because this school, more than any other school I've ever been at, is mission driven. It's something we take very, very seriously. You see the core values on the wall over there. You see our identity statement over here, what we believe. So today, this mission, which was crafted several years ago under Dr. Much's leadership, updated mission. Mission is really, why do we exist? What's our purpose? And our purpose is to really, if I'm going to boil it down, make sure every one of your children are ready for their future. Not the future that was our past, but their future, what they need. And this is what is so challenging because of this last part of our mission, to adapt and contribute in a rapidly changing world. You know this. You're out there in the real world working. But we're in a period of acceleration because of technology. And that has huge implications on schools, which are notorious for being the slowest to change. So the old joke is, when Rip Van Winkle wakes up, the only place he feels truly comfortable is going to a school. So that's a challenge for us because we move quite slowly. So we'll get into that theme about how we're trying to disrupt that. But we're trying to challenge your students. We're trying to inspire them. Their education shouldn't be something that just happens to them. We want them to be self-motivated. And of course we want them to achieve their dreams, but maybe their dreams aren't achieved. So I would say probably a lot of us are still working on achieving our dreams. There's nothing wrong with that. But that passionate learner part is really, really important. We don't want it to be just sit and get, as the old expression goes. So a little bit about myself, Paul Richards, my second year here at ASD. Born and raised, spent my entire life in the Boston suburbs, and then was a science teacher, got into administration, started on Nantucket, then to Needham, Boston suburb, schooling kind of all over the New England region there. And I was a high school principal for 11 years, 2 schools in Massachusetts, and then our first overseas post at the American School of London. So we basically decided that life in the suburbs, there must be more than that. Our kids were getting school age, so we decided to raise them overseas, and we haven't looked back. In fact, after London, when we were looking for head of school positions, we gave the kids the option to go back to the US, and they said, please no. We want to stay overseas. So we went to Saudi Arabia, which within a few months they said, what have we done wrong to you? But honestly, it was a fantastic family experience because Saudi, much like many places in the Middle East, caretakes families. There was a lot to do. Eventually, it wasn't going to be a long-term thing for us because of just Tina's lifestyle there as a woman in Saudi Arabia, and then the kids in high school. High schools are still a relatively new concept in Saudi. So looked all over the world and then found really what was our first choice, an hour away on a plane in Dubai. So as I said, second year now, and in my 6th year as a superintendent. But what it's really important for you to know is I was both trained and it's in my DNA to be a reformer. There are different kinds of leaders, and I'm not criticizing one over the other. There are managers, there are those who keep things going, and that's very, very important. And then there are people who try to change and change the animal of the school. I'm very much in the reformer category of trying to improve, and that sometimes means disrupting. If you do a Google search on me, you'll see some of the disruption back in the States that we started to push back on. My dissertation at Boston College was around the stress culture in suburban high schools. Kids who are chasing the perfect transcript, the perfect grades, the perfect college, overscheduled, perfectionism, because we had a serious mental and physical health crisis and it's one of the kind of little secrets. You may have seen in the Atlantic a couple of years ago the suicides in Palo Alto. But there are clusters of suicides across the US, but also in Asia, because young people are having a hard time adapting to the sheer volume and pace of what schools are putting them through. So I've been in this camp for a long time, and I'm going to push and poke a little bit today, and we're going to have some good food for thought. And really, what many of us are looking at today's period of schooling is a crisis in relevance. Is what we're doing today actually going to be relevant for what your children need? Because if it's not, we're doing a huge disservice to your children. And John Dewey, this is a quote over 100 years old, and we just can't teach the way we were taught. We're not preparing them for our future or our past, we're preparing them for their future. And then as a board member mentioned, kind of summed it up nicely, because I don't want people to get the impression, and teachers to get the impression, that everything that we're doing is wrong. But if we teach the way we did in the 80s and 90s and aughts, there are strategies that simply are not going to work anymore. Your children are not going to need to go into a textbook, read a chapter, answer the questions at the end of the chapter. That's not going to serve them out there in the real world at all. So these are some of the things that we're really pushing back and make sure our teachers are not using strategies that are not going to bear fruit. But we're working against this really entrenched conventional wisdom that goes all the way back to the Victorian times. This room would have been set up the same way in 1880 if we were having a lesson than it is today. So rows and things like individual students, that goes back over a century, yet we still do it. So the basic logic went like this. School children need to learn the skills. They'll go through the curriculum, learn different skills. We'll test them. That'll tell us how much they're learning. The school's test scores will tell us how good of a school it is. And if we really hold them to rigorous academic standards, they'll get to college. They'll go to a good college. The better the college, the better the job. This will work. Well, for a long time, actually, this did work. This was the logic that produced you had jobs that were both high skill, high pay, and you had jobs that were middle skill, high pay. But those middle skill, high pay jobs are gone. They've either been outsourced or they don't exist anymore. So high skill, high pay jobs are still there. Low skill, all that sort of stuff is still there. But the reason the middle class is under such strain is because this is not working anymore. This is not producing students who can go out there and thrive in the workplace. So education is trending. Education is catching up. And this is a very kind of straightforward continuum. From Otto Scharmer, who's a professor at MIT. He wrote a book called Theory U, which is around really how we can move students to where it's all about them and not about us. So you start in a very kind of old-fashioned, cynical way of teachers are up in front of the class, they give their lecture, you take notes, and you hope that students are learning. And then you test them to see if it happens. The next level is around making sure that all the teachers are teaching the same thing, that there's some pacing, that there's consistency. So it really doesn't matter which teacher you have, but it's still very teacher-centric. This is better, but still not good enough. You got to get below this line, and you start to get into things where students are more the center of what's going on. So The teacher is shifting to, instead of controlling everything, they're more of a facilitator. They're actually a coach in the classroom, but it's all about what the students are doing and how they're shaping their own learning experience. But that's not the end. What we're really hoping for is connecting those learners. And this is what's happening out there in the real world, is learners are connecting with others through networks where you have creativity being created in groups. You've got students kind of making sense of their own reality, and schools helping them bring those ideas into fruition and learning through that whole process. So I shared this with our teachers at the beginning of the year as a way to just highlight the fact that we're on a continuum. We're moving away from it's about us to it's about them, and ideally it's about the them as a larger community. I'm going to make all these slides available if you want to take any pictures or things like that. So, of course, universities are in crisis. You may have read some things about that. Many young people now are saying, we don't need universities. I just want to go into the workforce and be a data scientist or a coder or things like that, and they can do quite well for themselves. So, not so much at the more elite levels, although you can question whether that education is relevant, but kind of the mid-level and below, there's a real crisis for enrollment. An even bigger crisis for industry itself, who are not getting the type of workers that they need. So here's the problem. And even at the most elite universities, they're saying every student looks exactly the same. They all have good grades. They all did well on their SATs. They all built a church in Guatemala. They all, honestly, they're all the same. They're all the same. They all played sports and all those sort of things. So they all look good, so it's harder for them to find authenticity, but also the skill sets are not matched. And the mindsets are focused on achievement and performance rather than discovery and innovation and creativity. So the workplace, the universities are saying, schools, we need something different. And the industry is saying, universities, we need something different. And one of the biggest influence, of course, are machines, machine intelligence. So this comes from Ted Dinter-Smith, one of the authors of, you may remember a book and a movie a couple of years ago, Most Likely to Succeed, where they highlighted some schools that were very aligned to future readiness. But your children won't necessarily be replaced by machines. Your children will be working with machines. They need to develop a relationship with machine intelligence. So the question becomes, what is the human factor that gets offered in a workplace? Because there are things like rote, repetition, and there's even some artificial intelligence that will be done by machines, but not everything will happen by machines. One of the encouraging things is, as we automate everything, I went into this summer to try to order a Subway, and I went up to the person and I said, "Can I have this?" And they said, "No." I said, "What are you talking about? You got to go to the machine over here and punch it in, right? Have you had this experience?" And then I got a slip and I went back to the same person and she said, "Okay." But that's the future. That's so it is coexisting with machines, but there's a human part of it. So what is the human part? Thinking, creativity, social networking, these adapting to your situation, cultural awareness. These are all the things that are now becoming much more important because solving for X will be done by a machine. Most coding is already done by a machine. So yes, it's important to know coding, but we're not going to create a generation of coders because they're going to be a very small percentage of coders who are going to write the code for the world, and the machines will do the rest. This is what's happening out there in the world. So this is why we as educators get really anxious and really urgent about changing what we're doing. So we cannot prepare our students, your children, to do low-level things, low-level tasks, because there'll be no opportunities for that. Let me give you an example. Don't worry, I'm going to let you work with your neighbor on this one. So functions, I'll give you a little time. No? No, I'm not serious. So here's a function. So what did we do? And we arrived to class back in the 90s, we'll say, right? We're in school in the 90s. And the teacher says, we're going to do functions today. We're going to solve for X. We're like, okay. So we sit back, we hear the lecture, we get the problem sets, and we just start working through them. And, that's the old drill and kill method. And then we go home and we have 35 problems that we need to practice. That's the old way. So then Khan Academy comes along. And I noticed it was quite interesting when I noticed how my children were learning things that they wanted to learn. This is like 4 or 5 years ago. Whether it was braiding hair or whether it was how to, my son was on the other day, how to grill a steak, things like, they go to YouTube and they go to things like Khan Academy to figure out how to do what they're doing. And so just going to Khan Academy, you could also do a search in YouTube. You could say, how do I plug in that? How do I find X? But Khan Academy will teach you how to add functions and how to solve for X and all sorts of things. But actually, this is now becoming irrelevant already. This was such a huge breakthrough in just 10 years ago, and now it's fast going into irrelevance. Why? Because there's an app called FX Math Solver, and all you need to do, and I did this over the summer, I just downloaded it, I plugged it in, it gave me the answer, okay? And you know how teachers say, show your work? Well, I just needed to scroll down because it was showing my work. And there are apps called Solve My Math Problems. There's an app for everything now. So the implication, and when I shared this with the teachers, it's a little shocking to know how quickly, and bless our children, they're very compliant and they do what we tell them, but they're also doing this, right? They have the app, they're going on Khan Academy. This is the future. So what do we need to know about finding X? We need to know basic literacy around math. We need to know what a function is. We need to know the logic. What we don't need to do is an hour and a half every night of problem sets, because frankly, you're not going to need that. So this is how we're disrupting. So what are the implications? Huge implications for teachers. Absolutely massive. So the first one is to stop, I love this expression, stop trying to outdo the internet with your content knowledge. Stop trying to control all the information that we're going to provide to your children. Because now we're guides. We're not the sage on the stage anymore, because the internet's much smarter than we are when it comes to content. Maybe not necessarily thinking, of course. So how do we guide? How do we coach? How do we create the conditions for learning for your children to thrive? Helping students believe in their potential. So machines are probably not going to do a very good job of being motivational speakers. But in some ways, isn't that what teachers should be doing, is getting the best out of your children and making them believe in themselves. Helping find meaning and purpose. So there is meaning and purpose even in functions. So we need to help them find that. The purpose of their work. Why do we need geometry? Why do we need to know how to write? Why do we need to know how to speak? Helping students understand the why. And then creating experiences with the students. Not for them, because that's what we've done for over 100 years. We've created learning experiences for the children. One of my big challenges to the faculty this year was, let's create it with them. And then getting back to what I said, creating the conditions where students can discover and achieve their own definition of learning, success, goals. And I know we do a pretty good job around here of setting goals and conferencing around that. And of course, that development happens in the classroom. So just going to take a break from talking for a moment. Talk to your neighbor, and then I'll take a couple of examples. But where do you see the opportunity for ASD to shift our practice? I would like to hear from you. Maybe it's program, maybe it's curriculum, maybe it's a new experience even beyond the school. Where do you think ASD can shift to better help your students be ready for their future? So just talk to your neighbor for a couple minutes. Okay, we're going to, I want to hear what you have to say. I know you could talk all day. Back in an hour. So I'm generally interested. We've got a few of our teachers and administrators in the back there trying to hide. There they are. They're right under the clock, if you're wondering. Jonathan and Ward and our new admissions director, Craig, so welcome. So we're listening because, again, we're not only wanting to co-create with your children, we want to co-create with you. So where do you want to see shifts at ASD? Just raise your hand and then we'll...
I've kind of been thinking for a while about the possibility. I know some American schools offer both the high school diploma and the IB diploma, which is very emphasized internationally, and the IB also approaches questions in different ways.
Yeah, the IB is another approach. It's got some real advantages that the AP doesn't offer. The AP has some advantages the IB doesn't offer, but there are a lot of just to kind of highlight some of the shift changes happening at ASD itself. This is one of them. We're starting to talk about a possible IB down the road diploma program, not the whole K-12, but just because we lose some students because of that. It's a 2-year program. So I would have said a few years ago, no way, but actually that may be viable. Yes?
Yep. Just make sure. So this is more conceptual, but I think, I heard in the mission statement that it was very important to teach and to child achieve their potential. And I think we're very good as a group to help the potential of, you know, the 2 standard deviations of students. And I think where perhaps I'd like to see more attention or more change is in helping or in challenging kids that want more, or either need more help or have more potential. And that's where I'd like to see perhaps some individualized learning programs or.
Yeah. Today we're doing a school-wide training around learning support, but the way we're going to frame it is every single one of your children has learning needs, diverse, and they're diverse. So yes, there are students who need more support, but there are students who need to be pushed more, right? So highly capable students. And in some cases, we have a couple of students who would be clinically diagnosed as gifted and talented. Students who are scary smart is kind of the expression we like to use. And it's like a 0.5% of the population. But they also, and we have some of those students here. And they need more. And so we're really pushing and looking to make sure. We know we have some glass ceilings out there on those types of students. So when we're talking about diverse learning needs, it's not just those who need more support. It's those who need more challenge. So yes, that's all part of it. In the far back there.
I think the smaller class sizes, I know that's a tall order, but I think that is a large thing that we're taught.
Class sizes are such a controversial piece. The research says class sizes, I'd say between 10 and 25 or so, it's actually there's no correlation that 10 is better than 25. It depends on the teacher. An outstanding teacher with 25 students will achieve more than a mediocre teacher with 10. Now, a fantastic teacher with 10, of course, is going to achieve more. But class size is a little bit of a mixed bag. You can get to a point where it's distracting because you have too many students, or there's not enough space. We're fortunate to have the space. So class size is still a very controversial topic in education circles. Do you want to rebut?
Yeah, well, just to give an example, so the instructor had said if anyone has any questions, I don't know what type of activity he was asking, but it was the whole class. He said if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand. My son said the whole time he raised his hand. He never got it, so then that whole chunk was not, and he was very thankful, and I'm thankful that he was assertive enough to go to the teacher, so he got half the credit.
Yeah. So actually saying, do you have any questions? That's an old-fashioned technique that we need to eradicate from our classrooms. And if I were coaching that teacher, and of course, I'm not meant to criticize our teachers. We have, that continuum I showed you, 1 to 4. We have examples of that across the entire school, and every school I've been at has examples across. The whole point is to try to shift everyone down to the better place. So instead, what teachers should be doing is saying, okay, what's your son's name? Aiden. What question do you have? And then it's called cold calling. We probably remember that when we were in school, but it's actually an effective technique of making sure, not saying, do you have any questions, because all the introverts will not raise their hand. So you've lost like half the class. And then the people who always raise their hand will raise their hand. So it's actually a technique that doesn't work very well. What you should do is start to say, okay, give me your question, not do you have a question. Give me one question you have. So this is part of the shift that we're trying to work with. So yeah, 25, it's harder to do if you have 25 students, but they actually shouldn't be doing that in the first place. One more, yes.
I have more of a question in regards to, you were saying testing. And then you were giving an example of function.
Yes.
Solve for function.
Yeah.
My question is, if we're still testing like we were testing in the old days, if I don't know, if the kids don't know how to do the problem, or at home or in class are using calculators or iPhones or whatever to get to the answers, and then you have the whole problem already there, and they're just copying and pasting it for everyday usability in class or whatever. Why are we still testing?
Yeah,
I'm a bit confused.
We're testing way too much, and unfortunately, a lot of the tests we do are prescribed to us through KHDA. We have to. but also there is, like the map testing, I don't want to say all map testing, but we do get good information, particularly around growth. Of course, we are always concerned, what if we're testing something that's not relevant, that's not needed? So it does give us a chance to identify some deficits, not just content. So really what I want to say, we don't want to test content. We want to test skills and dispositions, how they approach problems, things like that. We're going to start measuring things that are a little harder to test. So it's not that all testing is bad, but over-testing doesn't really tell us a heck of a lot.
Yeah.
So your children should have a basic, so when the calculator came, there was a lot of question of, is this going to completely change math? It didn't. We still teach the basic concepts, like you need to know how to add, how to divide, but you don't do that with big numbers. So the same thing's happening with calculus even now, is you don't need to know anything more than the concepts, because machines will do the rest. We don't actually need calculus anymore. Only about 4% of the population uses any calculus whatsoever. What's much more important is statistics and big numbers and big data and probability. But schools still are having a very hard time shifting people towards statistics, which is much more relevant for life. We're still putting kids through calculus, which is relevant for, again, about 4% of the population. So let me move on. I want to share a little bit about what we're working on. Our leadership team, we have a fantastic group of leaders, and we're working on quite a bit. And of course, the central piece is the strategic plan. It's important for communities to really push itself to disrupt kind of the normal day-to-day improvement that we work towards, and I'll get to this in a moment. Really, we're in the stage where we're creating what our preferred ASD looks like 3 years out. And this is the year we're really pushing teachers. I challenged them in my opening speech in the year to start trying new things in the classroom. Try one thing that really disrupts. You used to do this, now you're going to do that as a way to push themselves. We're in a year of accreditation, which means we're going to be looking at ourselves and how we hold up to standards, of course. Accreditation is a process that helps us get better. It's not just a checklist so that we keep that MSA certification. And then we have a whole bunch of learning initiatives. Standards-based is a good one. That's still a work in progress, of course, but moving away from testing and numerical grading and skills, or you get your letter grade, that's a B, and you don't even know what that means. Standards, but grading towards standards, which is what students know and what they're able to do, is much more important. And then there are a whole bunch of operational things, trying to work towards a cashless system in the cafeteria. There's all sorts of things that we do behind the scenes. And those of you who are brand new, how many are brand new this year? Welcome. Excellent. So we went through an exercise over the past year or so to where would be the areas that we break through. So 2 years ago, and some of you I know were in the room then, we had the board and the community, there are about 50 of us, including students, identified 3 strategic areas. And we actually call these our threads because they go K-12. So one is around service, volunteering, finding a way to get out of our bubble of privilege and actually getting out there and giving and contributing and volunteering and things like that, service. Personalization of learning, this is huge. Your children shouldn't just get a one-size-fit-all education. They should get something that meets their needs. So it's not just inclusion or extra support. It's gifted and talented, it's acceleration, it's interest-based learning, giving your children more opportunities to explore things that they may find interesting. PlayStation is not on that list, just so you know, don't worry. And then evidence of learning. How do we actually know that they're learning things that we know are important but are not easy to test? So do we know whether they can solve for X or not? Yes, we can know that pretty easily. Do we know if they are compassionate? Do we know if they have perseverance and can kind of some grit to get through challenging situations? So we're not only going to be starting to measure things that we haven't before, but we're going to be looking at our performance as a school as well. We're working towards a performance report for the school itself. So then we said, okay, that's good. But last year it was, how can we make sure that students have an opportunity to go deeper in subjects that they may be interested in and subjects that are relevant to their future. So we identified these pathways, we're calling them, these areas that we feel there'd be a critical mass of students who would really appreciate and engage with the topics and the content. So tech and innovation, that's a pretty straightforward one. Globalism, internationalism, so maybe think of the student who wants to go into an NGO. Business and entrepreneurship, what a great city to help students learn how to put a business plan together or how to be entrepreneur with ideas. Language bilingualism, this is around our collective frustration that our students are not progressing in Arabic to the fluency level. We know there are some students who there's an interest in perhaps an immersion program in Arabic. Maybe it's just one group of students who go through, but they can learn Arabic to the point of bilingualism. And then we have the most amazing performance and arts program here at ASD. So actually looking at performance as a discipline. So the way this is going to look, and we're still at the conceptual sides of this, is we're going to look for opportunities K-12 where students can engage in tech and innovation concepts. So in the elementary school, it might be mini units, it might be activities, it might be new technologies. You get to the middle school, it might look more like pursuits. There might be even some classes around that. When you get to the high school, you can have a lot of flexibility. It might be very distinct classes. It might be experiences out there in the world. We have some of the most amazing labs. We're not going to build a jet propulsion lab here at ASD. We're just not. But there are amazing labs out there where we need to open up to our students. And I know there are many of you out there who are ready to open your doors for our students to come and learn on some of these. So each one of these pathways, we're going to take this year to envision what these will look like and where the opportunities are going to be. But we're not just going to wait. We're not going to spend all of our time just talking about what we want to do. We're going to start to look for what we're calling early wins, which are things we can just change right away. So the mindset this year, as I said, this comes from Stanford's design school, is really trying to try new things, be willing to fail. Don't overthink it, just try it. Your students, your children most likely have seen this sort of concept, this design thinking concept. This is the year of design thinking, not that next year we're not going to do it, but really pushing this, let's try something new. Even if it means failure, we'll learn from it, and in some cases, we'll really break through. And this is our, as Google uses the phrase 10x challenge, this is our 10x challenge for ASD, what I challenge the faculty. Can we co-create the future ASD with the students? Because if we don't do it with them, we run the risk of missing the mark. What do they have to say? And Buckminster Fuller just has this quote that never gets old. There are things that you can change incrementally, but there are some things where you just need a brand new model. And look at the disruption out there in the world right now. There are models that just get thrown out. The biggest hotel and accommodation site owns no property, Airbnb. The biggest transportation piece or company owns no cars, Uber. So there's huge disruptions where the model just changed itself. So before we get into one topic that I want to push you guys on a bit, there are commitments that we make to you, and these are important. We're not going to use your children as experiments. Does that mean we're going to try some new things and it may not work? Yes, we need to do that because we need to have, a lab mentality here as well, and so we can have some breakthroughs. As I mentioned, we're not going to wait for tomorrow to come because your children are here today, and I know you want some of these things right away. The challenge, of course, is you can't take, say, a teacher who's over here and within a short period of time put them over there. We have many teachers who are already over there, but the big, longer push is to shift practice. Is the shift that we were all taught to teach it a certain way. Now we're being taught to teach in a very different way, and just by human nature, that's a difficult task. So as I mentioned, we're going to measure improvements to make sure it's not just by chance. We're going to see if it's actually progressing, and we want to partner with you. This is, your community. Claudia, there you are, Claudia. I always appreciate when people sit in the front row, because nobody ever wants to sit in the front row. But Claudia, at the beginning of the year, talked about this is your school. And it is. It's your children's school. It's your school. This is a true community school. So we want to partner with you. But we also need commitments for an effective homeschool partnership. I know the bullets are a little small to read there. This comes from an article called "The Silent Tragedy Affecting Today's Children" by an occupational therapist. And it's been read over 20 million times. It's just got sent to my inbox the other day. So the concern around psychologists and psychiatrists is that we have home settings, homes where parents are distracted because of their devices, where parents are letting their kids run the show, where there's entitlement over responsibility, where there's not proper attention for sleep or nutrition. That's a very sedentary lifestyle at home. And that's just endless stimulation. It's endless, technological babysitters. So, just plugging in your child, instant gratification, and this, I love that last piece, absence of dull moments. One of my favorite times of the day are the dull moments, because you just kind of say, okay, and scientists would say our brains actually need a good 20 to 30 minutes a day of low activity. That means no reading, no looking at the news, no looking at your phone, no watching TV or anything like that. It's actually doing nothing. It's like just being a couch potato staring at the wall. Your brain actually needs that. So what we're hoping and what we need is trending towards this. So parents who make time to really understand what's going on with the emotions of their child, setting limits. The most important thing we know as parents, and we have 2 teenage children now, sometimes you just have to say no, not because you really feel that way, but it's important you set limits and you have guidelines. So, Tina and I say, let's just say no every once in a while, because that's going to reinforce the fact that there are boundaries. So, I think they're on to us, though. So you can see, nutrition, sleep. These are all things that are very, very challenged because we're all being pulled. We're also being pulled in many different directions. But this idea that home is a place where you're prioritizing some different things that maybe are not able to be done in school. So, maybe there's not enough time for creative play, social interaction, although they do get this at school, of course, but they should be getting it at home as well. So, no disrespect to cows, but love this expression I heard last year: sacred cows make the best burgers. This was somebody talking about change in education, and I think it was even change in the business world. Not everything can move incrementally, where it's like, okay, we're going to get a little bit better every day, and eventually we'll get there. There are things where that's the best strategy, and there are things, as Buckminster Fuller said, you just need to get rid of the old and bring in the new model. So, homework. Can you believe somebody stood up in front of the entire community and said, homework-free ASD? I mean, honestly, who would say something like that? It's been really, part of that was just kind of poking a bit and challenging the students and sending some messages. It's the best way to communicate to a community is not just writing a newsletter and hoping somebody reads it, is to get up and take the mic and say something that's going to cause discussion. And surely this has caused discussion. So I want to give you my thoughts of homework, and I want to give you an example of a sacred cow, which we may decide to turn into burger. So homework, first thing you should know about homework is there's general agreement that it gets too much credit for success in life, and it also gets too much blame for what's wrong in education. So it's overdone, it's overhyped. And if you look at homework, when public schools first started, in the 19th century, the homework debate started as well. And if you track the interest in homework, it's like a roller coaster. And it always responds to big world events, usually from like generation to generation. So when Sputnik was launched, homework went up. Why? Because America was falling behind and we needed to, what's wrong with our schools? We're not launching things into space. And then we, won the space battle, and then it started to wane again. And then A Nation at Risk came out in the early 80s. I don't know if you remember that report. It basically said, you're not preparing this generation for what they need. So homework went back up again, because that's an easy response, isn't it? Not necessarily changing instructional practice, that's hard. What's easy is to give kids more work. So there is a very weak correlation to achievement. There is zero correlation of homework and achievement at the elementary level, which means if they're getting a good education in school, they can do no homework and do just as well as students, same education who are doing homework. There is no correlation that homework makes a difference. And we're going to define what homework is and how it differs from home learning. We're not talking about your kids coming home and playing PlayStation for 4 hours. We're talking about something different. In middle school, there's a slightly stronger correlation, but it has more to do with the importance of being able to come home, get yourself organized, sit down at your desk, do an assignment, get it back into your backpack and off to school. So it's more around habits, work habits, discipline, than it is about the actual work. And then high school, there's an even stronger correlation, but there's a stronger correlation because we start grading homework. So the more homework you do, the better you do in school. So it's kind of a really mixed bag. I would suspect that if we remember our most meaningful homework back in our day, it was not the thing. It was not worksheets. It was not those problem sets. It was perhaps projects. It was perhaps books or new skills that we learned. So the relevancy of a lot of our homework, of bad homework, it's irrelevant. It's not going to prepare for really much of anything. And then there's some real interesting work, particularly out of Stanford, around the fact that too much homework, and this comes from, and Silicon Valley is just notorious for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of homework a night, is significant mental health problems, significant physical health problems. The school I led in the Boston suburb, where we was 1,400 kids in high school, half the freshmen wanted to go to Harvard. We would have 2 to 3 dozen hospitalizations every year. They were very quiet. It wasn't just a public thing, but that was because young people cracking from the pace and the workload. Mostly girls, because girls are more compliant in what they do what they're told to do as far as work. And then we had a cluster of suicides. We had 4 suicides in 2 years, and then community to community, we're also experiencing that as well. So I'll tell you, many of you may be coming from some of these suburbs. It's in real crisis. There's a mental and physical health crisis among our young people. Now, homework is not the driver, but it's a piece of it. It's a piece of it because they're working really hard at school, because your kids are wonderfully compliant. They're going home and doing another 3 to 4 hours of working really hard on the same stuff. But they're doing it at home without the benefit of the teacher or without the benefit of their peers. So you know this as parents. It drives us crazy as parents when you have a project and your kids are trying to collaborate with people who are all over Dubai, or they're doing things that is just busy work. Kids will tell you, if you ask your children, they don't mind challenge. What they really hate is just busy work. It's just things that is just really doesn't seem to have any point. So there is a perfect storm around homework. And we think about what, we go back to what do your children actually need? So, one of the interesting things about CEOs in Silicon Valley, the people who are changing the world that we live in the last 10 years, there's this amazing statistic that about 2/3 of the CEOs in Silicon Valley have some significant learning disability, usually dyslexia. So they're highly creative people who also failed out of the traditional school system, dropped out of school, didn't work for them, because there's a skill set that works much better in the new future world. So these are the people, I don't know if Zach Sims is one of these, but these are the people who are creating our new reality and the reality for our children. But what Zach says is, you have to invest in what he phrases the startup in all of us. So you're constantly reskilling. You need to know some code because that's what the work, so you learn, you take a 6-week coding class. You need to know something about, Japanese culture. You take a course, not a course, but like we were talking about before. You access that learning so you understand, so you can adapt. So when we're talking to our graduates, and many of them are coming back and telling us what the workplace is like, they're saying that it's constant adaptability. It's, I need to learn this, so I needed to learn it. And it's a very dynamic place. So we need we need your children to be self-motivated. And they're not going to become self-motivated if we do everything for them. If we tell them, if we script from 7 a.m. all the way to midnight every day, they're not going to become self-motivated. So after I said what I did, we went to this organization called allourideas.org. If you go on their website, they give a good example about how to make New York City greener. And there are like thousands and thousands of votes. But you can create your own crowdsourcing questions. So we asked the children to basically rank, I don't know if any of you snuck a peek at what this looked like, but you get choices. So we populated, the question was, what is a good use of time at home? What would be considered good home learning? So you had things like doing worksheets versus, learning an instrument or things like that. So there's a whole series of questions or prompts, and then there's an ability to add their own. And the students voted. I don't know how many students participated, but there were probably 600 or 700, and that's a pretty good take for a school our size. And we didn't even do the elementary school because it's a bit more complicated. They don't have email addresses, some of them, I learned. But also, I think it would have been a little confusing for them. But we had 28,000 votes in about 4 or 5 days from your children. And they started ranking all these things. So what they said, of course, and these were some of the top choices. These are things that they felt was good use of their time after school. So following their interests or their passions, getting work experience. I like this one, practicing problems that I choose myself based on what I'm struggling in. The idea of needing to do problem sets at home, there's always going to be a need for that. Do you need to do 30 if you can show the teacher that you've mastered it in 3? That's the shift. Do you see the shift there? So it becomes busy work when you already know it and you're just doing 30. But if you need to do 30 because it takes 30 to learn it, fine, no problem. But why do we force students into doing all 30? If they can show us in 5, halas, finish, move on. Reading for pleasure, visiting, we had a lot of stuff in there around enjoying the city that they find themselves in. So visiting galleries, doing service learning, building something, having optional work. This is where we would like to partner and say, if you want to do extra, here are some areas that you can do it. But it's self-directed. You can go find this. Here are some areas. So it's not that we're just going to turn your children over to you and say good luck. It's we're going to give them ideas and things that they can do. But the big shift is around, that didn't transfer right. Maybe just fix this transition. All right, let's see. So really what this is all about is trying to get rid of bad homework. The worksheets, the repetition, the control, and rebrand it as home learning. So to give your students, your children, with help from the school, with suggestions from the school, the control so that they can self-direct what they need to do. What do they need to do for the next class? What do they need to do for university prep? What do they need to do for life, for work? Allowing them the ability to have some ownership and some control and to develop that motivation of learning, continuing your learning at home, but not through a paint-by-numbers approach that has been endemic in our schools for a long time. Oh, I didn't get rid of the other one. So you can kind of see it there. One of my favorite quotes of that crowdsourcing exercise was, "I'd like to direct my learning without having to be told what to do." This is from one of our own ASD students, and I'll just repeat it. "I'd like to direct my learning without having been told what to do." Is that unreasonable? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. This is really the crux of what we're talking about when it's home learning. So, what we're going to do when it comes to homework, I'm going to write, I'm working on a kind of a essay to the faculty, which we're going to deliver later this week. I'm going to send you a version of what I wrote to them, probably in another week, so you can kind of get an idea of some of what I talked about today, but also where we're headed. We're going to create a bit of a task force to start to vision what it would look like to eradicate the bad homework and focus more on what home learning can look like if your children have more options, more control, more responsibility to prepare for what comes next, both with what comes next tomorrow, what comes next week, next year, or next decade. So in our last couple minutes here, I'm curious, what else should we consider making burger? Oh, we got some ideas. Yes, what else?
Talk first, go for it.
This all sounds amazing, mind-blowing, right? But I feel there's a missing link. So we're talking about the future, and we're stuck in the past. But there's always the middle, and the middle is looking a bit. You also mentioned a lot about parents, about the teachers, the faculty, and the students, but there was no link of parents. And the reason I'm saying that is, for example, when we did the back-to-school night, and the teacher said there's no more homework, a lot of parents fought back, okay? So we need to find a middle ground because it's hard to change old habits, which is great. I'm all for the no homework. But there needs to be communication from teachers to parents. This is what your students are studying at home so that you can do the extra fun stuff. So if they're doing governments, hey, let's talk about it at dinner
That's
time.
right. Yeah.
If they're doing volume or whatever in math, let's bake a cake. So there's a missing link, and that's parents at the moment. The second point is basically how long before we can see the personalization of learning take place, because it kind of feels like if, and I'm saying this from experience, whenever we go to speak to people about things that we feel could really use improvement, there is no channel where parents can voice, here's how we see this going. I mean, it's a journey for all of us. You're learning, we're learning, but we also have a lot of input. Yeah. And I feel like a big part of it can be, you can learn a lot from us too.
Absolutely.
On certain things because
Absolutely.
we know our kids.
Yes,
and
that's right.
we also live in the world. We can be the missing link.
Yep.
So create a missing link for the parents. A channel where we can come and give opinions and ideas and help you come up with things.
Fantastic.
Volunteering, things
Yep.
like that. I really feel
We look, I will never excuse or defend if we're not listening. I really liked, Nadine Richards at the high school hosted something that was new for ASD, and that was a drop-in. How many of you attended her? Yeah, so she's basically having a drop-in. That I hope becomes a normal thing for us, and I think during the interview process I agreed to do the same, so I'll do that. So listening, yes, because you're our partners. So if we're creating conditions at home, I mean, here, you create the conditions at home, but it's this suggestions from the school, it has to link. So we do need to up our game when it comes to that. Yes?
Yeah. I'm a bit confused with the whole homework thing. I think
Yes.
there's I'm just a bit lost because, okay, there's elementary, middle, and high school.
Yes, yes.
And I think that if you only have kids in one of the three, you're kind of getting lost in the information.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm getting mixed information all the time.
Yes,
Continuously.
you are.
I think that's part of what we're talking about, that there's a missing
Yeah.
link. We don't know who to talk to, and we're not getting direct information one way or the other. So I don't understand. We're not doing homework for elementary school, as far as I understand, and we're not doing it for middle school, and we are doing it for high school.
Yes.
I'm just lost. I'm actually asking questions.
Yeah.
I don't understand what the answer.
So I know slightly more than you do, but not much. So here,
Continuation.
Yeah.
If we're not doing homework as in homework, I
Yeah,
understand
yeah.
we're learning at home.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
going to be doing I don't know what, but
Yep.
if we're not actually getting grades, I don't know, but I was a really bad test taker as a student. If there are kids who are bad test takers, if they're not getting those grades from the homework part to balance out their high school grades,
Yeah.
they're gonna fail. So
Yeah,
that's
so-
from my experience from school.
Yeah, and it's important
I'm
for-
very confused how that's being addressed.
We
Down the
need
line, I don't have the
we need
problem right
more
now.
we need more of these sessions around standards based. And if you see it on a Talk Tuesday, there's usually 1 or 2 a year. Please do attend that, because the movement away from the traditional grading, like there aren't grades in middle school. There are no grades.
There's no grades.
No grades.
Well, we don't
We're-
need them, right?
right.
Because
But in
if
high school-
we're not going to high
Yeah, so in high school there are grades. Why? Because
Yeah.
colleges insist upon them, but that's a real, but let me answer the homework thing because it's important. So schools are notorious for having silos. You have even though you were on the same campus, you have elementary, you have middle, and you have high. Even the best schools in the world struggle to get the K-12 alignment. So the elementary school really pushed themselves to create a homework free, where it's around play, it's around reading, around other things. They did it, and they had the green light to do that. The middle school has been working more on setting limits, and the high school have setting limits, but bigger limits. My job is to try to get the K-12 approach to make sense. So when I pushed, over the summer, I was thinking, okay, I was looking at the revised homework policies, and I said, this is just kind of more of the same. What if we actually found a way to make the same mentality and approaches at the elementary school work for middle and high school? It will have to look different, and there are things like APs that would look very different. But I said, forget about just trying to tweak. Let's see if we can get rid of homework altogether and make it more home learning. So when I challenged the staff to that, and when I said it at the assembly the other day, we had teachers who started announcing, I'm homework free. And so the cart's a little ahead of the horse on that, a little bit. But the intent is actually the right one. So what we're doing this year, and we're working with the principals, is a K-12 thing that makes sense. We have a lot to do to up our game when it comes to providing suggestions. Again, we can't just turn your children over to you and say, good luck, bring them back tomorrow. It has to be, here are the types of things that will help them prepare for the next lesson, for the next day. So it is things like, do enough of these problems so that you know it, and then do no more. Or I want you to read, or I want you to really go deeper in this topic that we explored today. Go find a resource on the internet and go deeper and write about it, but not getting into you got to bring your homework back. I want our teachers spending more time on their lessons and what they're doing in school than grading and prescribing and checking up on homework. So we have a lot more to do. It's going to be a little messy for at least probably another year or two. Couple more comments. Yes. Oh, if you haven't spoken yet. Yes, in the back. You've spoken already? Okay.
I have two things
Yes.
I would like to say. One is all this stuff you're saying about the teachers and trying to get moving them from here to there, trying to make it more child-oriented. Fantastic. I wish my senior could have lived to see all of those changes. But I felt very strongly always since my senior was in middle school that how can the kids have a say? Can the teachers get evaluated anonymously, win the top 15, win the last 15% of the extreme comments, but some kind of consistent
The feedback.
from the inside the classroom, because not all students are going to love every teacher for sure.
I agree.
But I know in my job as a teacher for 20 years, that was the biggest teaching tool for me, because teachers, students said things that hurt me, like, oh, she talks too much or something.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to stop that. Or she uses her kids in examples too much. Okay, I'm not going to do that. Things like that. That was very useful for me. That's one. The other thing about the sacred cow, that's one comment.
Yeah.
The sacred cow that I think very strongly as a senior mom, senior parent, is college. It is not for everybody.
Yeah.
And students should not be made to feel inadequate if they don't have their engineering pathway set out or whatever else. So doable, feasible, seriously talked about gap years that are good for learning.
Yeah.
I think that would be fantastic. We don't have something done, and we have, even that makes one feel inadequate. It's not about us, it's the child who will, ego stops him from saying, I need help. I don't want to do this.
I have no rebuttal because I agree with everything you say there. I'm going to move on just quickly because I'm already over time, and I know you have lots of questions. So here's what I'll pledge, and I see our Michelle in the back who's going to help me with this. But we'll set up a session where I won't do any talking. I'll just take questions and comments. So Michelle Kateri, our new advancement director, let's all look at her. Michelle, we're going to set up another one of these where I'll just take your questions like Nadine did the other day. So I want to end on a couple things. Not everything needs to be thrown out there. A lot of things that are actually very old school that will still be highly relevant to your children. So I don't know if you're aware, but there's a new feature-length documentary out about Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers was a very complex and innovative and disruptive educator. Yes, he had all the the puppet stuff that was a little weird at times, but a fantastic movie of capturing that complexity and what his contribution was to the well-being of our youngest children. So I'm going to play you the trailer, and if you haven't seen this yet, it's on iTunes. Take about an hour and a half and see it. You'll be in tears. You'll feel really motivated. You'll feel good about and a lot of the stuff you see around ASD very much aligns to what Fred Rogers did. So I'm going to try to make this work, so bear with me for a sec.
Its host, Fred Rogers.
Mr. Rogers?
Yeah.
I want to tell you something. I like
We're going to get the sound to work here for a second. Try it again.
I like you, my dear. Thank you very much.
Take all of the elements that make good television and do the exact.
Did you hear anything back there?
You have Mr. Rogers. Low production values, simple set, unlikely star, yet it worked.
I've always felt that I didn't need to put on a funny hat or jump through the hoop to have a relationship with a child. He's always trying to get a message across.
Another show, a week on death,
What does assassination mean?
on divorce.
Some people get married, and after a while, they're so unhappy that they don't want to be married anymore.
He was radical. I know everyone says that, but he was radical.
They didn't want black people.
All right, let's try this again.
A television program for children made its unauspicious debut on station WQED in Pittsburgh. Its host, Fred Rogers.
Mr. Rogers?
Yeah.
I want to tell you something.
What would you like?
I like you.
I like you, my dear. Thank you very much for telling me that.
You take all of the elements that make good television and do the exact opposite. You have Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Low production values, simple set, unlikely star, yet it worked.
Oh, I've always felt that I didn't need to put on a funny hat or jump through the hoop to have a relationship with a child.
He's always trying to get a message across in every show, a week on death,
What does assassination mean?
on divorce.
Some people get married, and after a while, they're so unhappy that they don't want to be married anymore.
He was radical. I know everyone says that, but he was radical.
They didn't want black people to come and swim in their swimming pools. My being on the program was a statement for Fred.
A neighborhood was a place where, at times that you felt worried, scared, unsafe, would take care of you.
He had a singular vision of kindness and love.
Love was at the root of everything. All learning, all relationships, love or the lack of it. Children have very deep feelings, just the way everybody does. There must be times when you do feel blue. I'm not feeling blue right now, though.
Me neither.
Won't you be my neighbor? And I suppose it's an invitation. It's an invitation for somebody to be close to you. The greatest thing that we can do is to help somebody know that they're loved and capable of loving. Won't you please won't you be my neighbor?
So, how many of you grew up with Mr. Rogers? Yeah, I mean, if you're not familiar with Mr. Rogers, well worth watching again if you are. So, we're never going to lose that part of ASD, the importance of kindness. So what's the old saying? I don't know what the question is, but love is the answer. So that is very strong here at ASD. It's one of the main reasons we came here is because we knew the community had that reputation of caring deeply about our children, treating each other a certain way. I've been at some excellent schools. I've visited some excellent schools. They don't necessarily have that same ethic that we have here. So let's not forget that as we think about tech skills and entrepreneur skills and things like that, the disposition of kindness and caring and compassion that you see up on our wall here, respect, responsibility, integrity, are as important, if not more important, than solving for X and things like that. So I want to just end on a book recommendation, and that is this book. Last summer, a year ago this summer, I was in San Francisco at a conference, and Thomas Friedman was the keynote. And I've always enjoyed Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist. World is flat, and then he had the hot, dusty world or crowded world as a follow-up. He's written so many good books. But I love how every few years he releases something that just changes my thinking. And the first part of this book starts in 2007 when the most disruptive changes started to happen in Silicon Valley, and walks a layperson like me through what the next 10 years looked like and why, like how did we go from 3G phones to 4G phones. There are huge advancements that happened to make that possible, and there are lots of other things. So if you want to know why the world has changed so quickly and where it's headed, this is a fantastic book, and he makes a nice connection back to his hometown in Minnesota, so he doesn't lose that community piece. So this is the book recommendation coming out of this Talk Tuesday. And the kind of the rest, we don't have time for a lot of questions at all. Actually, I'm already late for my next meeting. But I hope you enjoyed this morning. I hope I pushed a little bit on some conventional thinking that you may have had. I hope and I know you wouldn't be here if you weren't interested in partnering going forward. So let's do this together. Let's continue to push us. Continue also to have patience. This is a big organization. Schools that are both bigger and have a stronger reputation tend to be the hardest of all to change. Why? Because there's an aspect of protecting what already appears to be working well. So it's harder for good schools to become the most relevant and personalized school that it can be. That's not going to stop us. It just makes it a little harder. So join us in that, and remember those commitments that I make to you of doing no harm, but doing it with you and trying to disrupt. So thank you. And I know you probably have questions, but I'm going to have to run off. But we'll do another session that's just all about questions and no content. So thank you very much.